quiet move is beginning to gain traction behind the scenes of the NFL, and if it becomes reality, it has everything it takes to spark immediate outrage among part of the Philadelphia Eagles fan base. Not because it involves a quarterback, nor because it is a massive, headline-grabbing contract, but because it involves something that hurts far more for a fan: the possibility of losing an essential player to the biggest rival in the division. And when that rival is the Dallas Cowboys, the impact is always amplified. The name starting to circulate in this scenario is Reed Blankenship, a safety who did not enter the NFL with star status, was not a high draft pick, and had no marketing campaign built around him. Even so, in a short period of time, he became a starter, a captain, and a reference point within the Eagles' defense. Now, precisely at a moment when the franchise is trying to stabilize its defensive project, Blankenship has emerged as a potential Cowboys target in free agency, and that completely changes the conversation, because this is not just about losing a rotational player. It is about losing a defensive leader, a traffic controller on the field, a player who understands the system at a deep level and operates as an extension of the coaching staff between the lines. And worse, losing that player to Dallas. This is not merely a market move. It is a direct risk within the NFC East. It is strengthening an opponent the Eagles face twice every season, in games that often determine playoff positioning, home field advantage, and even tiebreakers. Blankenship represents a type of player every defense needs, but few manage to develop. He is not only physical, he is cerebral. He is known for his obsession with film study, for recognizing offensive patterns, and for adjusting alignments even before the snap. Those traits are extremely valued by modern defensive coordinators, and they are extremely difficult to replace. With the Eagles, Blankenship grew inside a complex, demanding system that requires constant communication among defenders. He did not simply learn that system, he came to command it in many situations. That is exactly why the mere possibility of seeing him leave should already be setting off alarm bells in Philadelphia. Now, when the Dallas Cowboys factor is added to the equation, that alarm turns into a siren. The Cowboys are coming off a defensively problematic season. They changed defensive leadership and urgently need players who can accelerate the implementation of a new philosophy, players who do not need an entire year to adapt, players who can teach while they play. Blankenship fits that profile perfectly. He understands defensive concepts similar to what Dallas plans to use. He has experience in schemes inspired by Vic Fangio, which currently influence a large portion of the league. And perhaps most importantly, he has a history as a mentor to younger players, something essential for a defense in transition. From the Cowboys' point of view, the logic is clear. From the Eagles' point of view, the risk is enormous. Because allowing a player with this level of internal knowledge to land in the hands of a direct rival is not just a loss of talent, it is a loss of information, of game reading, of situational understanding. Blankenship knows the defensive adjustments used in critical situations. He knows how the defense responds under pressure. He knows the team's tendencies. He knows details that never show up in statistics. And that kind of knowledge does not disappear when a player changes uniforms. Imagine facing the Cowboys in a decisive game, with Blankenship on the other side, recognizing formations, anticipating calls, and adjusting teammates in real time. That is not an exaggeration. That is exactly the kind of marginal advantage that decides NFL games. Financially, the situation becomes even more delicate. Projections indicate that Blankenship could cost something around $7 million per season for a starting safety, a captain, and a player fully adapted to the system. That is not an out-of-market number. On the contrary, it is a relatively reasonable contract in today's league. In other words, this is not a decision forced by salary cap limitations. This is a strategic choice. And strategic choices send messages. If the Eagles decide not to compete for Blankenship, the message sent to the locker room will be closely observed. Players notice when leaders are valued and when they are not. They notice when the front office chooses to save money at key positions. They notice when team culture begins to prioritize spreadsheets over on-field impact. That affects trust. It affects engagement. It affects long-term perception. The Eagles' defense has always been built on communication, collective intelligence, and discipline. Blankenship embodies those values. Letting go of that without a clear replacement plan is taking an unnecessary risk. And replacing Blankenship is not simple. It is not enough to sign another safety. You need to find someone with game intelligence, leadership, communication skills, and the ability to adapt quickly. Players with that profile are rarely available, and when they are expensive. Historically, when the Eagles try to patch defensive holes in a hurry, results tend to be inconsistent. A defense functions like a living organism. Removing a central piece creates side effects that do not appear immediately, but accumulate over the course of a season. And when that central piece goes on to strengthen a direct rival, the impact is doubled. There is also the emotional factor of the rivalry. Eagles versus Cowboys is never just another game. It is identity. It is pride. It is history. It is constant provocation. Every detail matters. Every marginal advantage counts. Seeing a defensive captain from the Eagles wearing a Cowboys jersey would, for many fans, be difficult to swallow. Not just because of the player himself, but because of what the decision represents. And that creates additional pressure on the front office. At this point, it is important to be clear. Nothing is defined. No contract has been signed. No negotiation has been confirmed. But the simple fact that this possibility is being discussed is enough to generate legitimate concern. Because in the NFL, dangerous moves rarely begin loudly. They begin exactly like this, quietly, logically, seemingly harmless. Another point that cannot be ignored is the direct impact on short-term defensive planning. The Eagles are still in a phase of fine-tuning, trying to balance youth with experience. Blankenship is exactly the type of player who bridges those two ends. He does not need time to adapt, does not require a learning curve, and does not hinder the development of younger players. Removing that piece from the board means increasing the burden on players who are still in the process of establishing themselves, and that can be costly in big games. In addition, allowing Dallas to make this move without resistance would send a dangerous signal within the division. Rivals pay attention to how franchises treat their own leaders. If the Cowboys manage to acquire Blankenship with relative ease, other NFC East teams will take note that similar vulnerabilities may exist to exploit in the future. That kind of perception spreads quickly around the league, and when it does, the consequences are rarely limited to a single offseason. When the market opens, decisions must be made quickly. Waiting can mean losing control of the situation. Every day of hesitation increases the number of suitors, drives up the contract value, and reduces the available options. This is exactly the kind of scenario that separates proactive organizations from reactive ones. The Eagles need to decide whether Reed Blankenship is just another name on the roster or a structural piece that cannot be handed to a rival, because if he ends up in Dallas, the impact will not be felt only on the salary sheet. It will be felt on the field. It will be felt in the division. It will be felt in every head-to-head matchup. And then, the inevitable question arises for Eagles fans. Is it worth the risk of seeing Reed Blankenship strengthen the Cowboys, or do the Eagles need to act now to prevent this loss from becoming a serious strategic mistake? Leave your comment. This is a decision that could define far more than it seems at first glance.